Can a fiddle leaf fig ever be too big, you might ask? Well, yes it can, and there's a few reasons why. So first of all, if it gets really, really tall, it can get a little bit top heavy. Sometimes fiddle leaf figs can get off balance, so they're growing like very far one way or the other and they're leaning. Also, they can become too tall for the room that they're in. Like the fiddle leaf fig behind me, I can't put back into my house in the winter because it's too tall. So if your fiddle leaf fig has gotten out of hand, I'm gonna walk you through exactly what to do about it. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is to make some decisions about your plant and to figure out what is the end result that you're looking for. Do you want it to have symmetry? Do you want it just to be shorter? Do you want it to look a certain shape? So figure out kind of what is the end result that you're going for before you make any cuts. So one trick I like to use is to take a picture of your plant and print out that picture and then actually make the cuts on the picture to kind of help you decide where that you're gonna make the actual cuts on your plant. Because once you cut your plant, you can't go back in time. So it's really important to decide where you're gonna make the cuts and what that plant is gonna look like after you make those cuts. So when you're deciding where to make the cuts on your plants, it's important to ask yourself, what are you gonna do with the cutting? So trimming back your fiddle leaf fig tree is a great opportunity to propagate your plant. So what I mean is when you make the cuts, you can actually create a new plant out of the cutting that you take. So if propagation is a goal, you're going to want to make sure that you leave enough space to actually put your cutting into water. So that's just one consideration before you make a cut. If you want to learn more about propagation, I have tons of videos on that, so I'll link those below. You're going to want to make sure that you're using clean and sharp pruning shears. I will link to my favorite ones below, but it's important because as you're making the cut, if your shears are not sharp enough, you can actually crush the plant and that can be really unhealthy for your plant. Make sure you have something handy like a paper towel to wipe up the excess sap that can drip from your plant because it can be pretty irritating. You definitely don't want to get it in your eyes and you don't want your pets or your babies anywhere near that sap. So once you've kind of decided where to make the cuts and you have your sterile, sharp pruning shears, the next step is just to make all the cuts. So I wouldn't do too many cuts in one day. Probably 3 to 5 cuts is the most that I would do on any one day for a plant because it can trigger some shock-like responses and it can be kind of, traumatic to your plant. And so I would figure out where you can cut and make the most impact with 3 to 5 cuts. So once you've made the cut, then you just want to kind of let your plant chill out. It's going to need to do some regeneration. And so it's a great time to use some fertilizer, to put it in a very sunny location so it has enough energy, and then to just give it a break before you do any more cuts so that it can kind of regenerate its health before you put it through any more trauma. So I like to do this process about once a year. It can actually be healthy for your plant to be pruned and then it can generate some new growth. So actually where you make the cuts may turn into branches at some points in your plant. And it just gives your plant the opportunity to get the shape that you want and to have new growth and kind of new life. And so check out your plants about once a year, see if there's any cuts that you need to make, see if there's any changes to the shape, and use this process to prune your fiddle leaf fig. I hope this video was helpful. If you want to learn more about how to propagate the cuttings that you take from your plant, watch my next video, a deep dive on propagation. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.